Let me begin by, first of all, talking a little bit more about what we do at the Yale Project on climate change communication. We think that the publics around the world are critical to resolving this massive global challenge. Not the only force, obviously, that goes into making decisions, but clearly an important, very important part. And that's for a couple different reasons. We're interested in how do Americans understand and misunderstand the causes, the consequences, and the potential solutions to climate change? How do they perceive the risks? So the likelihood and the severity of different kinds of impacts from fires and floods and storms. What kinds of policies will they support? What kinds of policies will they oppose? And then what kinds of behaviors are Americans already engaged in around climate and energy? How are they willing to change their behavior? What prevents them from changing behavior? So this is the first thing I want to talk about is, do we accept that climate change is even happening? Okay. Now what has been happening, this is, I've collected results from every survey organization that have been asking a variant of this question, is global warming happening? And they've been asking it repeatedly over time so we can look at the trends. And they all use different questions, so they come up with different estimates. But what I want you to look at is actually the trends, okay? And what we saw is that all of them show that there was a surge, a high water mark in about 2007, followed by a steep decline, on average about 14 percentage point drop in the proportion of Americans who even accept that global warming is real. Bottoming out in 2010, and since then coming back up, slightly, growing incrementally, not back up to where we were in 2007, but on its way back. Okay? So, what's going on here? Well, we see this in other numbers as well. Here, only about half of Americans, as of last April, in our last national study, understand that global warming is mostly human-caused. Okay? So there are other people who think it's mostly natural. Critically, only 4 in 10 Americans today understand that most scientists agree that global warming is happening. Okay. Now note that this question isn't asking, do scientists think that it's human-caused? It's not asking, do scientists think this is a serious problem? This is just asking, do they think it's happening? About which there is absolutely no scientific disagreement. Even those who dismiss the seriousness of the issue don't deny the fact that the world has gotten warmer. And yet only 4 out of 10 Americans understand this basic fact. This is critical. In our research, we've called this a gateway belief. Because the more people understand that the experts agree, the more likely they are then to themselves say, oh, okay, well then I think it's real. I think it's human-caused. I think it's a serious problem. And moreover, I support a strong policy action. And again, a big drop from 2008 to 2010. So what was going on? Well, this is a very active area that we're currently trying to figure out. But our working hypothesis is that basically there was a perfect storm in this whole time period. First of all, the economy. 2008 is when the housing bubble pops, the financial crisis hits, unemployment surges to over 10%, and unemployment and the economy soar to the top of public priorities where they have sat and dwarfed everything else ever since, pushing climate and a lot of other issues literally right off the table. That's not hard to understand. But what many people don't recognize is there's also been a massive decrease in media coverage. Our colleagues, Max Boykoff, tracks newspaper coverage. Newspaper coverage dropped by 2/3 in this time period. I'm not talking about quality here. I'm just talking about numbers of news stories. Nightly network news coverage, CBS Evening News, NBC Nightly News, dropped by 90%. Okay. Now this is an issue that most of us only know about because of the media. If there were windows in this hall, we could all look out the window and there would be CO2 pouring out of tailpipes, pouring out of smokestacks, pouring out of buildings. In fact, it's pouring out of all of us right this very moment. Every time you breathe out, there's CO2 coming out. And you've never even thought about it until I just mentioned it. Okay? Because you can't see it. It's invisible. And I dare say most of the public doesn't know a climate scientist. They don't read the peer-reviewed literature. They've never even heard of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Okay? So really, the only way that most people know about this issue is through media. And when the media doesn't cover it, it's literally out of sight and out of mind. Okay, but things have begun to pick back up. So why? Why is that? Well, one, the economy is getting better, and so people have a little more time to breathe. But we've also seen some increased media coverage, in particular because the United States has just gone through 2 years of record-setting extreme weather events. In 2011, there were 14 individual disasters that each cost at least $1 billion. And then came 2012, which came with a long list of billion-dollar disasters itself and kind of with a big punch at the end of Hurricane Sandy. Okay? And what we know is that 80% of Americans tell us that they have experienced one or more of these natural disasters. A third of them tell us that they have been personally harmed in some form or fashion by these disasters. And what we're finding is that many Americans are now starting to connect the dots between climate change and these events. Moreover, there's a whole variety of energy policies that people already support. So, for example, providing tax rebates for people who purchase energy-efficient vehicles or solar panels. People love that idea. Funding more research into renewable energy sources has had high levels of support as long as we've been asking it. People love the idea of the transition to clean energy. In fact, they say, when we ask, how soon should we do this? They say, let's start now. They don't think that we're going to do it like flipping a switch and suddenly we'll have it, but they say, let's get started. Regulating carbon dioxide as a pollutant. This is the big policy that's on the table because there will not be comprehensive climate legislation out of the current Congress. So this is what President Obama is now trying to do through EPA regulation. And we're going to see a huge fight over this. Well, currently, 2/3 of Americans support that policy. A carbon tax on fossil fuel companies if we use the money to pay down the national debt. That's a tax. People think that we are absolutely inherently opposed to taxes. Not necessarily. Depends on who the tax is on and what the money is used for. Lots more to be said there. How about eliminating all subsidies for the fossil fuel industry? People like that. They don't, however, like the idea of eliminating subsidies for the clean energy industry. That they oppose. And I'll leave it there. And this is also part of the critical thing, is that we have kept talking about climate change as a global problem. Global warming, global climate change, which further distances it. Okay? But the more we begin to have the conversation about local climate change and how we are vulnerable, how our recent experience of extreme weather has demonstrated to Americans all over, including in New York, how we are in fact vulnerable. Our current systems were not built for the kinds of conditions that we are already experiencing and we're going to experience more of in the future. This is a conversation that people are absolutely willing to start. Okay. Also, in our research, we quickly realized that, of course, while we talk about the public, there is no such thing as the public. There are different publics on this issue and, of course, all important issues. And in the course of our work, we've identified what we call global warming's 6 Americas. So let me introduce your fellow Americans to you. The first is a group we call the alarmed. This is 16% of the public. These are people who are convinced it's happening, it's human-caused, it's serious, it's urgent. They say, let's go, but they don't know what we can do. Then comes a group that we call the concerned. These are about 1/4 of the public. These are people who think it's happening, it's human-caused, it's serious, but distant. Distant in time, distant in space. Then a group we call the cautious, another 1/4. These are people who are kind of on the fence. Is it happening? Is it not? Is it human? Is it natural? Is it serious? Is it kind of overblown? Paying attention, just haven't really made up their mind. Then a group we call the disengaged is 5%. These are people who've heard the term global warming but don't know anything about it. Then a group we call the doubtful. These are people who say, I don't think it's happening, but if it is, it's natural. It's nothing we had anything to do with, nothing we can do anything about, so I don't pay much attention, I don't see it as much of a risk. And then last but not least is the group we call the dismissive, 13%, who are firmly convinced it's not happening, it's not human caused, it's not a serious problem, and again, many of them see it as a conspiracy. And just to make the point that there are completely different conversations happening in this country at the same time, we asked them, if you could ask an expert on global warming one question, what question would you ask? The doubtful and dismissive, they want to know, so how do you know that global warming is happening or human caused? And on a deeper level, they want to know, and why should I trust you? Whereas the groups in the middle are like, okay, maybe it's happening, but so what? Why should I care? Whereas these groups, the alarmed and concerned, are saying, okay, I'm with you, it's happening, it's human caused, it's serious. But what do we do? What do we do? And what we're starting to see just a little bit, starting to enter into their conversation, is it too late? And that's a really dangerous idea because it's entirely disempowering. Okay, so the point being is that there are very different audiences, and if you want to be effective at communicating, the first rule is know your audience. You need to know who they are, where they come from, what do they already have in their head as they come into the exchange, and moreover, what are their underlying values? So here, let me just demonstrate this quickly. This is support for climate and energy policies. So first of all, regulating CO2 as a pollutant, they line up just like you would expect. The alarmed support, the dismissive oppose. 20% renewable portfolio standard, requiring all utilities to produce 20% of their electricity from solar and wind and so on. The alarmed love it. Dismissive hate it. Okay? Now why is that? Because one of the fundamental things that we see all the time in our research is that drives a lot of this are values. People who care a lot about climate change have what we call or tend to have strong egalitarian values. They care about getting rid of poverty. They care about affirmative action. They care about the way we treat each other. Okay? And it just so happens that they happen to think climate change is a serious problem. By contrast, the groups down here are much more likely to have what we call individualistic values, okay? Which often gets expressed as anti-government attitudes. The government's too big, it's too interfering, it's too much regulation, there's too much taxes, it's too much interference with our individual freedoms. Styled in today's politics, it's the Tea Party and libertarianism. But then there come things like renewable energy research. Everybody supports that. Subsidies for fuel-efficient vehicles and solar panels. Everybody likes that. Now why? This isn't hard. We understand why the alarmed and concerned support it. They worried about climate change. They want to produce energy in low-carbon ways. Why would the doubtful and dismissive support clean energy? Because it resonates with their values, which are fundamentally about freedom, self-reliance, and independence. Okay? This is about wanting an energy system where we're no longer dependent on others for our energy, especially other countries that generally don't share our democratic values. So what kinds of political type actions are Americans willing to take? Well, they're certainly willing to take the easy stuff, like sign a petition or attend a public meeting. Welcome, you're all part of this one. You're up here. Sign a pledge to vote only for political candidates who share your views on global warming. 32%, that's a third of the country, is willing to do that. You know what kind of shockwaves that would send to the political system if only a quarter of those people actually followed through on this? Donating money, volunteering, writing letters and contacting, lobbying government officials to change behavior. There's actually a large number of Americans who are willing to do that, and it works out to something on the order of just this one, 10 to 65 million adults are willing to do that. So who can convince Americans to do this? And this is one of the things I find most interesting in our latest study. Our closest friends and family members. Not Facebook, not Twitter, not Obama, not environmental leaders, not any of these outside others. Our own closest people. Our significant others, our kids, a friend. Okay? And I think this is actually really exciting. Having a conversation, anybody can do that. Anybody can do that. And yet the fact is, we're not talking about it. The president doesn't talk about it. The Congress doesn't talk about it. the media doesn't talk about it, and we don't talk about it. And therefore, it might as well not exist. So you want to change anything? The first thing you can do is talk about it. It's that simple. Okay, so just to sum, as I've shown, the national political climate shifted in that 2-year period, and we definitely saw the impacts of that on lots of ways. However, there's still majority public support for a lot of these policies, that there are these 6 different Americas, and they exist all over America. They exist within our families. I can't tell you how many times somebody has come up to me and said, "You just nailed my Uncle Bob," right? I sit across the table from him at Thanksgiving, and he gives it to me about climate change. Okay? We know these people. The facts are actively interpreted by these different audiences who are always constructing their understanding and reaction to this issue based on what they know or think they know, what their underlying values are, and the emotions that come up. This generates intense emotions for people. Not just anger and hostility, also feelings of guilt, feelings of frustration, feelings of fear. And we have to find a way to work our way through this together. Knowledge is necessary, but it's insufficient because all of these other things are also playing a role as well. And yes, there are some things that we need to do, like talk about the consensus, to talk about the human consequences. I didn't even talk about that, but that's really an important theme that most people don't understand at all. The links to extreme weather, and that this problem is solvable. That really is critical. And last, we just got to talk about it. Thank you.